The winter of 1848 came to Red Hollow Plantation like a knife drawn slowly across skin, cold, deliberate, and unforgiving. The cotton fields lay dormant under a blanket of frost, their skeletal stalks reaching toward a sky that promised nothing but more grey, more cold, more hunger. In the distance, the Cumberland Mountains rose like dark teeth against the horizon, their peaks wrapped in clouds that never seemed to move. Hannah stood at the edge of the tobacco barn, her breath forming white clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. At 6 feet 11 inches, she made the doorway look small, though it had been built to accommodate loaded wagons. Her shoulders were broad as a man's, broader than most, and her hands, scarred from 2 decades of labor, hung at her sides like tools waiting to be used. She wore no shoes, never had, even in winter. The overseers said her feet were tough as leather. The other enslaved people said something else, that the earth itself refused to hurt her. She had been born standing, or so the story went. Her mother, Esther, had died bringing her into the world in the summer of 1822, in a cabin that no longer existed on a plantation that had been divided and sold 3 times since. The midwife who delivered her, an old woman named Celia, swore that baby Hannah hadn't cried. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. Instead, she'd opened her eyes, placed her enormous infant hands on the dirt floor, and pushed herself upright. At 3 days old, she'd been the size of a 6-month child. At 6 months, she could walk. At 2 years, she stood taller than grown women. The white people called her a freak of nature. The black people called her Sister Thunder. Now, at 26 years old, Hannah was a ghost who walked in daylight. She spoke perhaps 3 words a month. She moved through the plantation like weather, inevitable, unstoppable, but somehow distant from the chaos around her. She picked more cotton than any 3 men combined. She could carry 2 full hogsheads of tobacco on her shoulders without breaking stride. When the plough horse died last spring, she'd pulled the plough herself for 2 weeks until Master Cornelius bought another. She terrified the overseers, though they'd never admit it. Red Hollow Plantation sprawled across 800 acres of western Tennessee bottomland, 20 miles from the Mississippi River and 40 from Memphis. Master Cornelius Hargrave owned 143 souls, worked them in cotton, tobacco, and corn, and considered himself a progressive man because he allowed them Sunday afternoons for themselves and didn't separate families without good cause. Near his house, a columned mansion of white-painted wood, sat on a hill overlooking the fields, like a judge looking down at the condemned. His son, Thomas Hargrave, was 24 years old, soft-handed, and mean in the way that weak men often are. He'd been given the title of overseer 3 years ago, though everyone knew he was playing at the role. He carried a whip he rarely used himself and a pistol he'd never fired. His real talent was for cruelty that required no strength, withholding rations, extending work hours, selling children away from mothers when his father was traveling on business. The enslaved people hated him more than they hated the genuine overseers, the hardened men who at least understood the work they demanded. Hannah had never spoken to Thomas Hargrave, had never looked directly at him. In 20 years, she'd perfected the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible, seen as a work animal, unseen as a human being. It was survival. It was sanity. But survival has a cost, and sanity has limits. The trouble began on January 14th, when the temperature dropped below freezing for the 7th night in a row. The enslaved quarters, long wooden structures with gaps between the boards and only small fireplaces for warmth, became boxes of suffering. Children coughed through the night. Old people stopped waking up. The master sent down extra blankets, 2 per cabin, as if 2 thin pieces of wool could hold back a Tennessee winter. Hannah shared her cabin with 7 others. Two families with young children, an elderly man named Job, who'd been a blacksmith before his hands started shaking, and a boy named Samuel. Samuel was 14, small for his age, with eyes too large for his thin face and a persistent cough that had worsened in the cold. His mother had been sold south 2 years ago. His father had tried to run after her and been caught in Kentucky, returned in chains, and died from infection after the whipping that followed. Samuel had no one but the community, and Hannah, though she rarely showed it, had taken particular notice of him. She gave him portions of her food. She positioned herself between him and the wind when they worked the fields. She'd never told him this, of course. She told no one anything. On the night of January 16th, Master Cornelius hosted a dinner party. Lanterns blazed in every window of the big house, and laughter drifted down the hill like mockery. The enslaved people could smell roasted meat, could see the smoke from cooking fires that never stopped feeding white mouths, while their own rations had been cut because winter stores were running low. Samuel had been assigned to carry wood for the fireplaces in the big house. Back and forth from the woodpile to the various rooms, up and down stairs, his thin arms struggling with loads meant for grown men. Hannah watched from the barn where she was oiling harnesses. She watched, and something old and patient inside her began to stir. At 9 o'clock, Samuel dropped a lantern. He'd been carrying it and an armload of wood up the back stairs to the second-floor drawing room. His hands, cold and clumsy, lost their grip. The lantern fell, crashed against the stairs, but didn't break. The oil spilled, but didn't ignite. No damage was done except to the boy's terror. Thomas Hargrave appeared at the top of the stairs, his face flushed with wine and irritation. He'd been in the middle of telling a story to a young woman from Nashville, trying to impress her with tales of managing the plantation's difficult property. The crash had interrupted his performance. "You stupid little—" He came down the stairs, 2 at a time. Samuel backed against the wall, his eyes wide, his breath coming in panicked gasps. "I'm sorry, Master Thomas, I'm sorry. It slipped. I didn't—" The first slap sent the boy sprawling. The second came before he could get up. Thomas grabbed him by the collar, lifted him. Samuel weighed perhaps 90 pounds and shook him like a doll. "You could have burned the house down. You could have killed people. Do you have any idea?" Hannah appeared in the doorway. She hadn't run. She'd simply walked from the barn across the yard, up the back porch steps, and into the house. No one stopped her because no one had ever imagined she would do such a thing. Enslaved people didn't enter the big house unless summoned, didn't interrupt white people, didn't cross that invisible line between their world and the world of their masters. But Hannah crossed it. She stood in the narrow back hallway, her head nearly touching the ceiling, her shadow falling across Thomas and Samuel like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. Her expression was empty. Her eyes were focused on Thomas's hand, the one clutching Samuel's collar, lifting him until his feet left the ground. Thomas saw her, froze. For a moment, the room held its breath. "Get back to your quarters," he said, his voice uncertain. "This doesn't concern you." Hannah took one step forward. The floorboards creaked under her weight, not the normal creaking of old wood, but a deep, groaning sound like the house itself was protesting. "I said, get back!" She moved faster than something her size should have been able to move. One moment she was 5 feet away. The next, her hand, huge, calloused, strong as a vice, closed around Thomas's wrist. She squeezed. Something in his wrist made a sound like a green branch breaking. Thomas screamed and dropped Samuel. The boy scrambled away, pressing himself against the wall. His eyes locked on Hannah's face. She lifted Thomas off the ground. It wasn't a struggle. She simply raised her arm, holding him by his broken wrist, lifting him until they were eye to eye. He weighed perhaps 180 pounds. She held him like he was made of straw. "Put me down!" His free hand clawed at her grip, his face turning red, then purple. "Put me down or I'll have you hanged. I'll have you—" Hannah threw him. Not a shove, not a push. She drew back her arm and threw him down the hallway like a man might throw a bag of feed. Thomas flew backwards, his body tumbling through the air until he hit the wall at the end of the corridor. The impact made a sound like thunder. Plaster cracked. A picture frame fell and shattered. Thomas Hargrave slid down the wall and lay still, his head at an odd angle, his eyes open and seeing nothing. For several seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the shouting started. 4 overseers came running: Henry Moss, Jacob Turner, William Crane, and a new man whose name Hannah didn't know. They'd heard the crash, heard Thomas screaming. They came with whips and pistols, ready to restore order, ready to remind everyone of the rules that kept the world spinning in its proper direction. They saw Thomas on the floor. They saw Hannah standing over him, her chest rising and falling, her hands opening and closing. They saw Samuel huddled in the corner, and they understood, or thought they understood. She killed Master Thomas. Henry Moss raised his pistol. She killed... Hannah moved. She crossed the distance to Henry in 2 strides, grabbed the pistol before he could fire, and crushed it in her hand. The metal bent like tin. She took the ruined weapon and swung it like a club, catching Henry across the face. He went down in a spray of blood and teeth. Jacob Turner got his whip around her neck, pulled tight, trying to choke her. Hannah reached back, grabbed his coat, and pulled him over her shoulder. He landed on the floor in front of her, the air driven from his lungs. She stomped once, her bare heel coming down on his chest. His ribs collapsed like a basket of twigs. William Crane fired his pistol. The shot was deafening in the narrow hallway. The bullet caught Hannah in the shoulder, punched through muscle and sinew, exited out her back. She didn't fall. Didn't even stagger. She turned to look at William, blood beginning to soak her dress, and something in her eyes made him drop the pistol and run. She caught him before he reached the door. The new overseer, young, barely 20, hired because he was cheap, pulled a knife and came at her from behind. He was fast, trained in fighting, and he managed to sink the blade into her side between her ribs. Hannah turned, pulled the knife out of herself without a sound, and buried it in his throat. He died gurgling, drowning in his own blood on the floor of Master Cornelius Hargrave's beautiful house. William Crane tried to crawl away. Hannah picked him up by his belt, carried him to the window, and threw him through it. Glass exploded outward. William's scream cut off abruptly when he landed 20 feet below on the brick patio. The shooting had brought more people running. House slaves, guests from the dinner party, Master Cornelius himself, red-faced and shouting. They crowded in the front hallway, none daring to come closer, all staring at the woman standing among 4 dead men, blood dripping from her wounds, her face still as stone. Hannah turned to look at Samuel. The boy was crying, shaking, but alive. She nodded once, a small, almost invisible gesture. Then she walked past the crowd, through the front door. They parted to let her through, down the porch steps, and out into the night. Behind her, Master Cornelius was screaming for his militia, for dogs, for chains and ropes and rifles. Behind her, the enslaved people were scrambling back to their quarters, terrified of the retribution that would surely come. Behind her, Thomas Hargrave lay dead with a broken neck and a broken wrist, and 4 overseers lay dead or dying, and the rules that had governed Red Hollow Plantation for 30 years lay shattered like the window glass scattered across the bricks. Hannah walked into the fields. Snow had begun to fall, thick, heavy flakes that landed on her shoulders and melted in the heat radiating from her body. She was bleeding from her shoulder and her side, leaving dark stains in the white snow behind her. The cold bit at her bare feet, but she didn't hurry. She walked with the same steady pace she'd used for 26 years, as if she was heading to the tobacco barn or the cotton gin, as if this was just another day of work that would never end. She stopped at the center of the largest cotton field, where in summer the plants grew higher than a man's head. Now it was just empty furrows and frost-killed stalks. She turned in a slow circle, looking at the land she'd worked since she was 6 years old, the land that had taken her mother, her childhood, her voice, her humanity, the land that had given her nothing but scars and silence and strength. Hannah raised her face to the sky. Snow fell on her cheeks, collected in her hair, melted in the blood soaking through her clothes. She spread her arms wide, and in a voice that no one at Red Hollow had heard in 20 years, a voice deep and resonant as distant thunder, she spoke. "Tell them the fields are mine now." Then she waited. She waited for the dogs and the militia, for the men with guns and chains who would come to restore order, to punish the unforgivable, to write the final chapter of her story in blood and rope and fire. She stood perfectly still, her arms still spread, a giant woman alone in the snow, waiting for judgment. But the judgment that came would not be the one anyone expected. Master Cornelius kept 12 hunting hounds, lean, vicious animals trained to track runaway slaves through swamp and forest. Their handler, a man named Dutch Carmichael, released them just after midnight. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. The dogs picked up Hannah's blood trail immediately, baying and howling as they raced toward the cotton fields. Hannah heard them coming. She lowered her arms and turned to face the sound. Her wounds had stopped bleeding. The cold had seen to that. But her dress was stiff with frozen blood, and pain radiated through her shoulder and side with each breath. She felt strangely light, as if the violence in the big house had burned away something heavy she'd been carrying for 26 years. The first dog reached her and leaped, jaws wide, going for her throat. Hannah caught it mid-air by its neck, held it at arm's length while it snapped and snarled, then threw it 15 feet into a snowbank. The animal yelped once and didn't get up. The other dogs circled her, barking furiously but no longer attacking. Something in their animal brains recognized what their master hadn't, that Hannah was not prey. She was something else entirely. Dutch Carmichael came crashing through the field with a rifle in his hands, followed by 6 militiamen from the nearby town of Waverley. They were farmers and shopkeepers mostly, men who drilled once a month and had never faced anything more dangerous than a drunk at the county fair. But they'd heard the stories, 5 men dead, a giant slave woman on a rampage, and they came with loaded weapons and fear-hardened faces. "There!" Dutch pointed at Hannah's silhouette against the snow. "Surround her, don't let her." Hannah ran. She shouldn't have been able to run, not with a bullet wound in her shoulder and a knife wound in her side, not after the night she'd had. But when she ran, the ground seemed to shake beneath her feet. She headed north, toward the tree line that marked the boundary of Red Hollow Plantation, her long legs eating up distance in great loping strides. The militia fired. Shots cracked through the cold air, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Most missed. One caught her in the back of the leg, tore through muscle, and still she didn't fall. She reached the trees and disappeared into the forest like a shadow, merging with deeper shadows. Dutch sent the dogs after her, but they stopped at the tree line, whining and refusing to go further. He cursed and kicked at them, but they wouldn't move. It was as if an invisible wall stood between the plantation and the wilderness beyond. "She can't have gone far," said one of the militiamen, a tobacco farmer named Seth Pruitt. "She's wounded 3 times over. She'll bleed out before dawn." Master Cornelius arrived on horseback, his face purple with rage and something else, fear. He'd lived his entire life believing in the natural order of things, white over black, man over woman, master over slave. Hannah had shattered that order. And if she wasn't caught and punished, if she wasn't made into a warning, then everything he'd built would crumble. "Burn the quarters," he said. "Every cabin." They must have helped her. They must have known she was planning this. "Sir, it's the middle of winter," Dutch began. "I don't care. Burn them and find that woman. I'll pay $1,000 to whoever brings her back, dead or alive." The enslaved people of Red Hollow watched from their cabin windows as the militiamen poured oil on the wooden structures and set them ablaze. They watched their homes burn, their meager possessions consumed by fire, and they didn't cry out, they didn't protest. They simply gathered what they could carry and huddled together in the snow, children clinging to mothers, old people leaning on the young. Samuel stood among them, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line where Hannah had disappeared. He was the only one who smiled. In the forest, Hannah moved like a wounded animal, slowly, carefully, leaving a trail of blood behind her that she couldn't hide. The trees here were old-growth oak and hickory, their branches bare and skeletal against the night sky. The underbrush was thick with thorns and fallen logs, but she navigated it as if she'd walked this path 1,000 times. She hadn't. She'd never been allowed off the plantation. But something inside her knew the way. After an hour of walking, she reached a creek, frozen over, the ice thick enough to hold her weight. She stepped onto it and followed the creek north, letting the ice hide her trail. The cold bit at her feet, but she'd stopped feeling it. Stopped feeling much of anything except a strange, singing sense of freedom that made her want to laugh or scream or simply lie down in the snow and never get up. She chose to keep walking. By dawn, she'd covered nearly 10 miles. The forest had given way to rougher terrain, hills and ravines, limestone bluffs rising like castle walls. This was the edge of the Cumberland Plateau, wild country where few white men ventured, and fewer still came back unchanged. Hannah found a cave, little more than an overhang of rock, but it blocked the wind and hid her from anyone looking from below. She crawled inside, pressed her back against the cold stone, and finally allowed herself to examine her wounds. The bullet in her shoulder had gone clean through. The one in her leg was still there, lodged in muscle. The knife wound in her side was the worst. Deep, leaking blood every time she moved. She should have been dead, should have died in the hallway of the big house, or in the cotton field, or somewhere in the frozen forest during her flight. But she wasn't dead. Her heart still beat, slow and strong as a drum. Her lungs still pulled in air. Her body, this strange, enormous body that had always marked her as different, refused to surrender. Hannah closed her eyes and slept. She dreamed of her mother. Esther had been a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with gentle hands and a voice like summer rain. In the dream, Esther was standing in the cotton field at Red Hollow, but the cotton was in full bloom, white as clouds, and the sun was warm on their faces. "You were born standing," Esther said, though Hannah had never heard her mother's voice. "Born to rise when others fall, born to break what cannot be bent. But child, listen to me now. Strength alone won't save you. The earth remembers, but you must teach it what to remember." Hannah wanted to ask what that meant, but the dream shifted. Now she was standing at the edge of a great river, wide as the Mississippi, but flowing with black water that reflected no light. On the far shore, she could see figures moving, men and women, dozens of them, hundreds, all walking north. Some were wounded, some carried children, all were silent. One figure stood apart from the others, a woman, tall as Hannah, with scars on her arms and back that formed patterns like ritual markings. She raised her hand, beckoning. Hannah woke to voices. The sun was high. She'd slept longer than intended. Below the cave, perhaps 50 yards down the hillside, she could hear men talking. Militia, still hunting. They had dogs again, fresh ones brought from another plantation, and they were working their way up the ravine, checking every cave and hollow. Can't have gone far with those wounds. Unnatural. That's what she is. My grandfather used to tell stories about slave uprisings in Haiti. Said there were men and women there who couldn't be killed by normal means. Said they made deals with... Shut your mouth with that superstitious nonsense. She's flesh and blood like anyone. We find her, we put a rope around her neck, end of story. Hannah moved deeper into the cave. It narrowed as it went back, the ceiling lowering until she had to crawl. She expected it to end in solid rock, but instead she found an opening, a crack in the stone barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. Cold air breathed from it, carrying a smell of minerals and deep earth. She heard the dogs getting closer. Heard men climbing the hillside, their boots crunching in the snow. She made her choice and pushed through the crack. On the other side was darkness. Hannah stood up slowly, her hands reaching out to feel the space around her. This was no mere cave. It was a cavern, vast and empty, with a ceiling somewhere high above that she couldn't see. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The air was warmer here, as if the earth itself was exhaling. She moved forward carefully, one hand trailing along the wall. Her eyes began to adjust, and she realized it wasn't completely dark. A faint blue-green luminescence came from patches of fungus growing on the walls. Foxfire, the old people called it. Ghost light. It provided just enough illumination to see by. The cavern floor sloped downward. Hannah followed it, leaving the voices of the militia behind. The deeper she went, the warmer it became. The walls began to change. No longer natural limestone, but carved stone. At first she thought it was just erosion, water-wearing patterns in the rock. But then she saw symbols, circles and spirals, handprints, figures that might have been human or might have been something else. She'd heard stories whispered in the quarters late at night when the overseers were asleep. Stories of people who'd lived in these hills long before the white men came. Before the Cherokee even. People who'd known how to read the earth's bones, who'd built great mounds and carved their history into stone. People who'd disappeared, leaving only questions and ghosts. The passage opened into a chamber. It was vast, cathedral-sized, with pillars of stone rising from floor to ceiling like frozen waterfalls. In the center of the chamber was a pool of water, perfectly still, its surface reflecting the foxfire glow. And around the pool, arranged in a circle, were bones, human bones. Dozens of skeletons, arranged sitting up, their skulls facing inward toward the water. Some wore remnants of clothing that had long since rotted to threads. Others were adorned with jewelry, copper bangles, shell necklaces, stone pendants carved with the same spiraling symbols that marked the walls. Hannah should have been afraid, should have turned and run back toward the daylight, toward the world she knew, even if that world wanted her dead. But she wasn't afraid. The bones didn't feel threatening. They felt like witnesses, like they were waiting for something. She approached the pool and looked into its depths. The water was so clear she could see the bottom, 30 feet down, maybe more, covered with white sand. And there, pressed into the sand, were more handprints, hundreds of them, some small as a child's, some large as her own. Hannah knelt by the pool's edge. Her wounds had started bleeding again, and drops of her blood fell into the water, spreading in crimson clouds. She watched the blood sink, watched it spiral down toward those waiting handprints, and she felt something shift. The air in the chamber changed. The water began to move, though there was no wind. The skeletons seemed to lean forward, their empty eye sockets fixed on her. And from somewhere deep in the earth, far below the chamber, below even the foundations of the hills, came a sound, like a heartbeat, slow, patient, eternal. Hannah placed her hand in the water. The heartbeat grew louder. The water began to glow, not with the blue-green of foxfire, but with a warm, golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The light spread up her arm, into her chest, filling her with a heat that was not quite warmth and a sensation that was not quite pain. She saw things, visions, memories that weren't hers. She saw the people who'd made the handprints in the sand, a tribe that had no name in any language still spoken. They'd been tall, some of them, as tall as her. They'd built cities in these hills, had farmed the valleys, had known secrets about the earth that had died with them when the new people came. Secrets about blood and bone and stone, about how the earth remembers everything that spilled on it, every life, every death, every drop of pain. She saw enslaved people, brought across the ocean in chains, their bodies broken but their spirits unbroken. She saw them call out to gods their captors didn't believe in. Saw them pour libations on the ground, saw them feed the earth with their suffering and their strength. She saw the earth drink it all in, remember it all, store it like seeds waiting for spring. She saw herself. Born standing, born different, born to be a vessel for something the earth had been waiting to pour into. The light reached her heart and exploded. Hannah gasped, pulled her hand from the water, and fell backward onto the stone floor. Her wounds were on fire, not with pain, but with sensation so intense it was like being born again. She watched as the bullet in her leg pushed itself out of her flesh, the wound sealing behind it. The hole in her shoulder closed. The knife wound in her side, knitted together, leaving only a thin white scar. She stood up. The exhaustion was gone. The cold was gone. She felt stronger than she'd ever felt, as if every fiber of her body had been reforged in some cosmic furnace. She looked down at her hands and saw they were glowing faintly, the same golden light that had come from the pool. A voice spoke, not from the skeletons, not from the water, but from the earth itself. It spoke in a language Hannah didn't know, yet somehow understood. You are chosen. You are remembered. You are the hand that breaks the chains, the storm that levels the house built on stolen ground. Walk in strength, daughter of earth. The ground will not betray you. The stone will not cut you. The roots will guide you home. Hannah understood then. She understood why she'd been born as she was, why she'd survived what should have killed her, why she'd been led to this place at this moment. She was not an aberration. She was not a freak. She was an answer to prayers spoken in the darkness, a weapon forged by generations of suffering and hope. She was the reckoning. Hannah walked back through the passage, through the crack in the stone, out into the winter daylight. The militia was still searching the ravine below, but she didn't hide. She stood on the edge of the cave, silhouetted against the sky, and she called out in that voice like distant thunder. "Here!" The men looked up and saw her standing tall and whole, wounds healed, blood washed away. They saw her and understood that something had changed, that the woman they were hunting was not the woman who stood before them now. Dutch Carmichael raised his rifle. "Take her!" 10 men fired. 10 shots rang out, echoing off the limestone bluffs. Hannah didn't move. The bullets struck her, struck the space where she stood, and fell to the ground like stones thrown at a mountain. Not one touched her flesh. "What in God's name?" Seth Pruitt dropped his rifle, his face gone white as the snow. Hannah smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a storm that knows it's about to break, of thunder that knows it's about to speak. She jumped, 20 feet down to the ravine floor, and she landed like a thunderclap. The ground shook. Snow cascaded from the trees. The men scattered, running in all directions, abandoning their weapons and their dogs, abandoning any pretense of courage. Hannah didn't chase them. She simply walked, heading north again, toward the mountains that rose in the distance like promises. Behind her, the militiamen ran back to Red Hollow Plantation, ran to tell Master Cornelius that his $1,000 reward would never be claimed, that the woman he'd tried to own had become something that could not be owned by any man. Behind her, in the cavern deep beneath the earth, the skeletons settled back into their eternal watch, and the pool's surface grew still once more, and the earth whispered to itself in satisfaction. The hunt was over. The reckoning had just begun. Word of Hannah's escape spread like fever through western Tennessee. Within 3 days, every plantation within 50 miles had heard the story, or rather, heard several different versions of it, each more fantastical than the last. Some said she'd killed 20 men. Some said she'd torn the big house down with her bare hands. Some said she'd turned into a bear or a wolf or simply vanished into smoke. Master Cornelius tried to suppress the stories, but stories are like water. They find every crack, seep through every barrier, and these stories carried something dangerous: hope. On the Blackwood Plantation, 15 miles east of Red Hollow, an elderly man named Moses stood in the slave quarters and told anyone who would listen about a prophecy his grandmother had spoken before she died. "She said a giant would come," he said, his eyes bright with something between madness and faith, "said she'd be born of suffering and raised in silence, and when she finally spoke, the earth itself would answer, said she'd open a road that couldn't be closed." On the Morrison farm, a woman named Cecilia refused to work. simply sat down in the cotton field and wouldn't move. When the overseer came with his whip, she looked up at him and said, "Hannah broke 5 men. You're just one." The whip never fell. The overseer walked away and didn't come back. On smaller farms and larger plantations, in cities and towns from Memphis to Nashville, enslaved people began to whisper a new name for Hannah. Not the giant, not Sister Thunder. They called her Hannah the Breaker, and when they said it, they smiled. Master Cornelius Hargrave understood the danger. This wasn't just about one escaped slave anymore. This was about an idea taking root. The idea that the system could be resisted, that the masters could be defied, that the natural order was not natural at all, but merely a story told by men with guns to men with chains. He called a meeting of the Plantation Owners Association. 20 men gathered in his parlor, the parlor where, just days ago, his son had died. They smoked cigars and drank brandy and discussed the Hannah problem as if she were a business matter that could be solved with proper accounting. "We need to make an example," said Robert Blackwood, a man who owned 300 slaves and believed God had ordained him to rule over them. "Catch her, hang her publicly, make sure every Negro in Tennessee sees what happens to uppity slaves." "We can't catch her," said James Morrison quietly. He was younger than the others, had inherited his farm from his father only 2 years ago, and had not yet developed the calluses of conscience that came with decades of slave ownership. Cornelius sent the militia. Dutch Carmichael sent his best dogs. She disappeared into the wilderness like she was never there. "Then we hunt her like an animal," Blackwood insisted. "Send trackers, send hunters. Offer rewards high enough that every white man in the territory is looking for her. And if she's really what they're saying," Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper, "if the stories are true, if she really did heal from gunshot wounds and walk away from 10 rifles firing at once." The room fell silent. These were practical men, men of business and property, men who didn't believe in superstition or slave magic or anything that couldn't be quantified in dollars and labor hours. But practical men can still fear what they don't understand. Master Cornelius stood up, his face gray, aged 10 years in the past week. "Whether the stories are true or not doesn't matter. What matters is that people believe them. And belief is more dangerous than any weapon. We find Hannah, we kill her, and we bury her so deep that no one will ever find the body. No martyr, no shrine, no legend, just silence." But Hannah was already gone beyond their reach. She traveled north through the wilderness for 5 days, moving mostly at night, avoiding roads and settlements. The earth had kept its promise. She didn't stumble, didn't lose her way, didn't suffer from the cold that should have killed her. She found caves when she needed shelter, streams when she needed water, and once a deer that had broken its leg in a fall and waited, almost grateful, for her to end its suffering and feed on its flesh. On the 6th day, she reached the Tennessee River. It was wider than she'd imagined, nearly a mile across, its brown water flowing sluggishly between banks of frozen mud and bare trees. Ice clung to the rocks along the shore, and fog rose from the water in ghostly columns. Somewhere on the far side was Kentucky. Free state, or so people said, though freedom was a relative term when federal law required the return of escaped slaves. Hannah stood on the bank and looked across. She couldn't swim, had never learned, had never been near water deeper than the creek that ran through Red Hollow's southern fields. The river was too wide to jump, too cold to ford even for her. It was an obstacle that should have stopped her. But the earth had shown her things in that cavern, had given her knowledge that felt like memory, like something she'd always known but had forgotten until the moment of remembering. She knelt and placed both hands flat on the ground. "Show me the way," she said. The ground trembled, small at first, a vibration that might have been mistaken for wind or distant thunder, then stronger. The ice on the rocks began to crack. The fog on the water swirled and eddied, and from somewhere upstream, carried on the current, came a sound like grinding stone. Hannah watched as the river's flow changed. The water pulled away from a section of the riverbed about 30 yards to her right, revealing mud and rocks, and beneath them, something else. Something white and smooth and ancient. Bones. They emerged from the mud like the spine of some vast creature, not animal bones but human, hundreds of them, thousands, arranged in a pathway that stretched from the Tennessee shore toward Kentucky. They were old, these bones, far older than the plantations, older than the towns, older than any memory of the people who now claimed this land as theirs. Hannah understood. This river had seen death before slavery, before conquest, before empires rose and fell. It had been a boundary between nations now forgotten, a graveyard for wars whose causes had turned to dust. The dead remembered. The earth remembered, and now they were offering her passage. She stepped onto the bone road. It was solid beneath her feet, the bones fused together by time and river silt into a causeway that creaked but held. Behind her, the water flowed around the pathway, kept at bay by something older than physics. Before her, the fog parted, revealing the far shore. Hannah walked across the Tennessee River on a bridge of bones, and with each step she felt the weight of the dead rising to meet her, not hostile, not welcoming, simply present, bearing witness to her passage as they'd borne witness to countless others who'd crossed this boundary fleeing bondage or seeking home. She was halfway across when she saw the figure. It stood on the far shore, tall as she was, wrapped in a cloak made of what looked like woven grass and feathers. Its face was obscured, but she could feel its attention on her, like the weight of the sun. This was the woman from her dream, the one with scars that formed patterns, the one who'd beckoned. Hannah reached the Kentucky shore and stepped off the bone road. Behind her, the bones sank back into the mud. The water closed over them, erasing all evidence of what had happened. The fog rolled in thick, and when it cleared, the figure in the cloak was standing beside her. Up close, Hannah could see her face, dark-skinned, ageless, with eyes that held centuries. The scars on her arms weren't random. They were deliberate marks, ritual cuts that formed symbols Hannah almost recognized. The woman smelled of wood smoke and river clay, and something sharper, like copper or blood. "You have been chosen," the woman said. Her voice was layered, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "Do you accept what has been given?" "I don't know what's been given," Hannah replied. Her own voice sounded strange to her, deeper than it had been, resonant, like words spoken in a canyon. Strength, purpose, a burden that will never be lifted, and a path that leads only forward, never back. You are no longer just Hannah, enslaved woman of Red Hollow Plantation. You are Hannah the Breaker, and the earth has marked you as its instrument. Every chain you break will make you stronger. Every captive you free will add to your power. But you can never rest, never settle, never stop until every shackle has been shattered or you yourself are destroyed. Do you accept? Hannah thought of Samuel cowering against the wall while Thomas Hargrave raised his hand. She thought of her mother, dying to bring her into a world that would treat her as property. She thought of the skeletons in the cavern, arranged in their eternal circle, waiting for someone to carry forward what they'd begun. "I accept," the woman nodded. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a length of rope, not ordinary rope, but something woven from sinew and fiber and what might have been hair. She tied it around Hannah's left wrist, pulling it tight. The rope seemed to sink into her skin, becoming part of her. "This is your binding and your freedom," the woman said. "It will guide you to those who need you. It will protect you from those who would destroy you, but it will also demand everything you have. When you sleep, you will dream of chains. When you wake, you will feel their weight on your shoulders until you find them and break them. This is the price of power, daughter. This is the cost of becoming a weapon." "What are you?" Hannah asked. The woman smiled. It was a sad smile, ancient and weary. "I am what remains when everything else is taken. I am memory given form. I am the prayers of the desperate made manifest. I have been called many names, priestess, witch, spirit, demon. None of them are true, none of them are false. I am the guardian of the bone road, and I have been waiting for you for longer than you can imagine. How many others have you given this to in all of time? 7. Most died within a year. One lasted 10 years before the burden destroyed her. One chose to end her own life rather than continue. You are the 8th. You will be the last, one way or another. The age of such power is ending. The world is changing, but before it changes, there is work to be done. The woman began to fade, becoming translucent, her form merging with the fog. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Follow the river north to the Cave of Echoes. There you will find the first of your tasks. And Hannah, do not trust kindness. It is rarely what it seems, and it will kill you faster than any bullet. Then she was gone, and Hannah stood alone on the Kentucky shore, the rope marking burning on her wrist, the weight of her new purpose settling onto her shoulders like a yoke made of stars. She turned north and began to walk. For 3 days, Hannah followed the river. She passed settlements and avoided them, saw boats on the water and hid until they passed. Kentucky was nominally free, but it bordered slave states, and slave catchers operated with impunity, capturing both runaways and free black people, claiming they were escaped property, selling them south for profit. She encountered her first slave catchers on the morning of the 4th day. There were 4 of them, rough men with hard faces, armed with rifles and nets and chains. They'd made camp on a bend in the river, and they had captives. A woman in her 30s and 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 9 years old. The woman's face was bruised. The children were silent, that particular silence of trauma, their eyes empty of everything except fear. Hannah watched from the tree line. The rope on her wrist grew warm, almost hot, pulsing like a second heartbeat. She felt the pull, the demand, the purpose that the woman on the shore had promised would never let her rest. She stepped out of the trees. The slave catchers saw her and went for their weapons, but Hannah was already moving. She crossed the distance to their camp in 3 strides, grabbed the first man by his coat and threw him into the river. He hit the water with a splash and went under, his rifle sinking after him. The second man got his pistol up and fired. The bullet struck Hannah in the chest, directly over her heart, and bounced off. It left a mark on her dress, but no wound, as if her skin had become something harder than flesh. The man stared, his face going from determination to disbelief to terror in the space of a heartbeat. Hannah took the pistol from his hand, crushed it, and backhanded him across the face. He flew backwards, hit a tree, and slumped unconscious. The 3rd and 4th men ran. She let them go. She'd come for the captives, not for vengeance, though the distinction was becoming harder to see. She turned to the woman and children. They were chained together at the wrists, connected to a stake driven into the ground. Hannah knelt, took the chain in both hands and pulled. The metal shrieked, stretched, then snapped like thread. The woman gasped. The children stared. "Go north," Hannah said. "Follow the river until you reach the Cave of Echoes. There will be help there. Tell them Hannah the Breaker sent you." "You're her," the woman whispered. "The one they're talking about, the giant from Tennessee." "I'm her. Now go, before those men come back with more." The woman gathered her children and ran. Hannah watched them disappear into the forest, felt the warmth on her wrist fade, felt the burden lift slightly, though not entirely. It never would, she knew, not until every chain was broken or she was dead. She continued north. The Cave of Echoes revealed itself on the evening of the 5th day, a massive opening in a limestone cliff face, its mouth dark and deep. Hannah approached cautiously, but the rope on her wrist was calm, almost pleased. This was the right place. Inside, the cave opened into a network of chambers and passages, but unlike the cavern where she'd been transformed, this place was inhabited. She saw light from torches, smelled cooking fires, heard the murmur of many voices. She followed the sounds and emerged into a vast chamber that had been turned into a settlement. Dozens of people, maybe 100, lived here, men and women, old and young, some clearly escaped slaves still wearing the rags of bondage. Others, dressed in better clothes, organized, purposeful. They stopped what they were doing when they saw her. Conversations died. Children hid behind their mothers. Everyone stared at the 7-foot-tall woman who'd walked out of legend into their sanctuary. An old man approached. He was short, bent with age, with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. He carried himself with authority despite his size. "You're Hannah," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. They said you were coming, said you'd been chosen by the old powers, that you'd walk a path none of us could follow. They said you'd be the one to finally break the wheel." He paused, studying her face. "They also said you'd bring death in your wake. That everyone who follows you will suffer, that you're a weapon that doesn't know how to be anything else." "Who said this?" "The woman on the shore, the guardian. She visits me in dreams sometimes, has for 40 years. I'm Moses, not the Moses from the Bible, just a man trying to do what's right. I run this station, part of the railroad, though we're not much of a railroad, more like a holding place for people who've run out of road. The woman and children I sent, they'll be here soon." Moses nodded. "We'll take them in, feed them, give them rest, send them on when it's safe. That's what we do. That's all we can do." He looked at her with something between pity and awe. "But you're not here to rest, are you?" "No. What are you here to do?" Hannah looked around the chamber at all the faces watching her. Dozens of people who'd fled bondage, who'd risked death for the chance at freedom, who now hid in a cave like animals because the world above wouldn't let them live as humans. She felt the rope on her wrist burning, felt the weight of her purpose pressing down. "I'm here to stop running," she said. "I'm here to make them afraid for once. I'm here to break everything they've built on the backs of my people, brick by brick, until there's nothing left but dust and memory." Moses smiled, but it was a sad smile, the smile of a man who'd seen hope before and watched it die. "Then you're not here to help us. You're here to start a war." "The war already started," Hannah said. "I'm just the first one to fight back." In the darkness of the cave, surrounded by the desperate and the damaged, Hannah the breaker felt the earth beneath her feet tremble with approval. The bone road had brought her here. The old powers had chosen her. Now the real work would begin. And somewhere far to the south, in the burned ruins of the slave quarters at Red Hollow Plantation, a boy named Samuel stood in the ashes and prayed to gods whose names he didn't know, prayed that Hannah would come back, prayed that she would teach him to be unbreakable too. The reckoning had begun. It would not end until every chain was dust. Winter deepened. The Tennessee hills turned white and stayed white, the snow piling up in drifts that made travel nearly impossible for anyone except Hannah. She moved through the frozen landscape like a force of nature, unstoppable, inevitable, growing stronger with each chain she broke. The Cave of Echoes became her base, though she never stayed longer than a few days. Moses and the others who ran the underground station learned to expect her arrivals without warning. Hannah emerging from the forest with another group of freed people, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes 20, all of them exhausted, traumatized, but alive. She didn't ask for thanks, didn't want conversation. She would deliver the people she'd freed, accept food and water, sleep for a few hours, then disappear back into the wilderness, following the burning pull of the rope on her wrist. In February, she freed 43 people from the Whitmore Plantation, 30 miles south of the Kentucky border. She'd walked in at midnight, torn the doors off the slave quarters with her bare hands, and told everyone inside they had 1 minute to decide, stay or follow. 43 chose to follow. The overseers who tried to stop them learned what 5 men at Red Hollow had learned, that Hannah the Breaker did not fall to bullets, did not flinch at whips, did not stop. In March, she intercepted a slave coffle, 30 people chained together, being marched from Virginia to the slave markets in Natchez. The traders had 12 armed guards. Hannah walked up to them in broad daylight on the Nashville Road and told them to unlock the chains. When they refused, she killed 4 of them in less than a minute and scattered the rest. The freed people said afterward that she'd moved like thunder made flesh, that where she struck, men simply ceased to exist. By April, her name was spoken in whispers across 3 states. Plantation owners increased their guards. Militias organized hunting parties. The governor of Tennessee offered $5,000 for her capture, but no one could find her. She appeared where she was needed, did what needed to be done, and vanished like smoke. The enslaved people called her a savior. The free black people called her dangerous. The abolitionists in the North didn't know what to call her, but they sent letters to the Cave of Echoes, asking for meetings, offering support, trying to incorporate her into their movement. Hannah ignored them all. She wasn't interested in politics or gradualism or the careful, patient work of changing minds. She was interested in breaking chains. That was all. That was everything. But breaking has a cost. Moses saw it first. Hannah came to the cave in late April with 17 people from a farm near Clarksville. She delivered them safely, accepted water, and sat down by one of the fires. Moses brought her food, cornbread and beans, still hot, and sat beside her. "You're getting thinner," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not sleeping. I can see it in your eyes." Hannah didn't respond. She ate mechanically, not tasting, just fueling. Moses was right, of course. She wasn't sleeping, or when she did sleep, she dreamed. Always the same dream, chains, millions of them stretching across the landscape like spiderwebs, connecting everyone and everything, and she was pulling at them, breaking them one by one, but for every chain she broke, 3 more appeared. The dream always ended the same way, with her standing alone in a field of broken links, exhausted, knowing that the work would never be finished. "The woman on the shore told you this would happen, didn't she?" Moses said quietly. "Told you the burden would never lift, that you'd feel every chain in the world until you broke them all or died trying. She told me. And you accepted anyway. What choice did I have?" Moses was quiet for a long time. Around them, the cave was full of life. Children playing, women cooking, men planning the next leg of their journey to Canada or the Free States. All of them possible because of Hannah, all of them alive because she'd chosen to carry the burden. "I'm an old man," Moses said finally. "I've been running this station for 23 years. I've helped maybe 2,000 people escape. And you know what I've learned? Freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about learning how to live after the chains are gone. Learning how to be human again, not just property. Learning how to trust, how to rest, how to build something instead of just destroying. I'm not here to build. I know. That's what worries me. Hannah, you're not just breaking chains. You're becoming something else, something harder and colder and more terrible than any overseer. You're becoming the weapon the earth made you to be, and weapons don't get to have humanity. They don't get to rest or heal or love. They just cut until they break. Hannah stood up, her food half-eaten. Maybe that's what's needed. Maybe the world needs weapons more than it needs humanity. Maybe. But what happens when there are no more chains to break? What happens to Hannah the Breaker when all the breaking is done? Do you just disappear? Do you die? Or do you become something that keeps destroying long after the enemies are gone? Hannah walked away without answering because she didn't have an answer. The rope on her wrist was already warming again, calling her to the next task, the next plantation, the next group of people waiting to be freed. She couldn't think about afterward because there was no afterward. There was only now, only the endless present of breaking and breaking and breaking. She left the cave and headed south. That night she freed 8 people from a small farm near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. The farmer was a small-time operator, only owned 10 slaves total, not wealthy enough to hire guards or build secure quarters. It should have been easy. But one of the enslaved men, a young man named Jacob, maybe 20 years old, refused to leave. "I can't," he said, his voice shaking. "My wife is still at the Morrison place. They sold her there 3 months ago. I can't leave without her." Then I'll go to Morrison and free her too, Hannah said. It's not that simple. He stopped, his face twisting with anguish. She's pregnant, due any day now. She can't travel, can't run. If you raid that plantation now, she'll be caught in the middle. She could die. The baby could die. Hannah felt the pull of the rope, felt the demand to move on, to keep breaking, to not stop for complications or difficult choices. But she looked at Jacob's face and saw something that made her pause. Love. Simple, desperate, human love. I'll come back, she said, after the baby is born. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll come back and free her. I promise. Jacob nodded, tears streaming down his face. He left with the others, heading north to the Cave of Echoes, to freedom without the person he loved most. And Hannah felt something crack inside her chest, not a physical pain, but something deeper, the first hairline fracture in the armor the earth had given her. She tried to keep the promise. She did. But the rope on her wrist pulled her east, to a plantation in Virginia, where 3 children were about to be sold south, separated from their mother. She went there instead, saved the children, broke more chains. Then the rope pulled her west, to Kentucky, to Mississippi, to Arkansas. Always another task, always another group of people who needed her right now, today, immediately. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. When Hannah finally made it back to the Morrison farm, it was too late. Jacob's wife had given birth to a healthy baby girl. 3 days later, when she'd tried to protect the child from an overseer who wanted to take it away, to sell it already at 3 days old, she'd been beaten so severely that she died from her injuries. The baby had been sold anyway, sent south to a plantation in Alabama, destination unknown. Hannah stood in the Morrison slave quarters and listened to an old woman tell her what had happened, and she felt something inside her go cold, not angry, not sad. Just cold, as if a part of her had frozen solid and would never thaw. She went to the big house and killed everyone inside, not in rage, not in passion, just methodically, room by room, until the Morrison family line ended in blood and silence. Then she burned the house to the ground and walked away while it collapsed behind her in flames and ember light. The rope on her wrist was satisfied. Another chain broken, another small victory in an endless war. But Hannah felt nothing. The crack in her armor had widened into a chasm, and she was falling through it into a darkness that had no bottom. She made it back to the Cave of Echoes 3 days later. Moses took one look at her face and knew something had changed. What happened? I broke my promise. A woman died because I wasn't there. Her baby was sold because I chose other people instead of her. You can't save everyone, Hannah. It's not possible. You're doing more than anyone else could. It's not enough. Her voice cracked, the first emotion she'd shown in weeks. It will never be enough. There are millions of people in chains, Moses. Millions. And I'm one person. One person who can break chains but can't stop them from making new ones. Every person I free, 10 more are born into bondage. Every overseer I kill, 5 more take his place. I'm not winning. I'm just making noise before the darkness swallows everything. Moses reached out and put his hand on her arm. His touch was gentle, grandfatherly, human. Then stop being one person. Build something bigger. Teach others to fight. Create an army, not just a weapon. I don't know how to build. I only know how to break. Then learn, or accept that you'll die hollow, having changed nothing but your own damnation. Hannah pulled away from his touch. The rope on her wrist was burning again, calling her to the next task. Always the next task. Always another chain, another person, another breaking that would never be enough. She left the cave without another word. For the next month, Hannah moved through Tennessee and Kentucky like a ghost, freeing people but barely seeing them, breaking chains but barely feeling the satisfaction. The crack in her armor had become a wound, and the wound was infected with something like despair. She began to take greater risks, walked into plantations in broad daylight, challenged overseers to shoot her, almost wanting them to find a way through her invulnerability, stayed too long in dangerous places, as if daring the world to finally stop her. In June, she raided the Blackwood Plantation. Robert Blackwood was one of the richest plantation owners in Tennessee, the man who'd called for her public execution at Master Cornelius's meeting. He owned 300 enslaved people across multiple properties. His main plantation house was a fortress, high walls, armed guards patrolling day and night, dogs trained to kill on command. Hannah walked through the front gate at midnight. The guards fired, dozens of shots, from rifles and pistols coming from all directions. The bullets bounced off her skin, fell harmlessly to the ground. She broke through the front door with one kick, sending splinters flying. Inside, Robert Blackwood waited with 20 armed men. He'd been expecting her, had heard the stories, had prepared. The men opened fire all at once, filling the entrance hall with smoke and thunder. When the smoke cleared, Hannah stood untouched. She looked at Blackwood and saw something in his eyes she'd seen before. Not just fear, but resignation. He knew he was already dead. "You're not human," he said. "You're something the devil made." "The devil didn't make me," Hannah replied. "You did." Every white man who ever held a whip, every overseer who ever separated a family, every politician who ever said slavery was God's will, you made me. I'm what happens when suffering gets so deep it touches something older than your civilization. I'm what your sins look like when they come home. She killed them all, 21 men in less than 5 minutes. Then she opened every door in the slave quarters, told 300 people they were free, and led them north through the Tennessee wilderness toward Kentucky. It should have been her greatest victory. 300 people freed in one night. An entire plantation destroyed, but Hannah felt nothing, just hollow, just cold. They were 3 miles from the plantation when the militia caught up. There were 50 of them, organized by the Tennessee governor specifically to stop Hannah. They had new weapons, rifled muskets with longer range and greater accuracy. They had tactics designed to overwhelm even someone with her abilities. And they had something else, knowledge. They'd talked to the survivors of her raids. They'd learned that while Hannah couldn't be harmed by normal means, the people she was protecting could be, and they were willing to massacre the innocent to get to her. The militia opened fire on the 300 freed people, shooting into the crowd indiscriminately. Men, women, children. They died in the first volley, bodies falling into the snow, blood spreading like spilled wine. Hannah roared, a sound like an avalanche, like the earth itself crying out, and charged into the militia line. She broke men like kindling, but for everyone she killed, 2 more fired into the crowd behind her. The freed people scattered, running in all directions, easy targets in the moonlight. She tried to protect them, tried to be everywhere at once, to shield everyone, but she was one person, and there were too many guns, too much hate, too much determination to stop her by any means necessary. By dawn, 147 people lay dead in the snow. The rest had escaped into the forest, but scattered, separated, vulnerable. The militia had retreated, their numbers too diminished to continue. Hannah stood alone among the bodies, covered in blood, none of it hers. She'd freed 300 people and killed 147. The math didn't work. It would never work. Hannah fell to her knees in the snow, and for the first time since the night at Red Hollow, she wept. Great, shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs, deeper than her bones. She wept for the dead, for Jacob's wife, for the baby sold to Alabama, for Samuel still trapped at Red Hollow, for every person she hadn't saved and every person she never would. The rope on her wrist burned like fire, demanding she keep moving, keep breaking, keep fighting. But she stayed kneeling in the snow, surrounded by the consequences of her power, and understood finally what Moses had tried to tell her. She was a weapon. And weapons don't save people. They just change how people die. Somewhere far away, in the cavern beneath the earth where she'd been transformed, the pool of water grew dark. The skeletons leaned back, as if disappointed, and the woman on the shore, the guardian, felt Hannah's despair echo through the spirit world, like a bell tolling the end of something that had barely begun. The reckoning had started, but it was breaking the breaker. Hannah stayed kneeling in the snow for 3 hours. The sun rose, cold and distant, painting the blood-soaked ground in shades of pink and gold that felt obscene. Birds began to sing, because birds don't care about human suffering. The world continued as it always had, indifferent to grief. Finally, she stood. Her legs were stiff, her muscles cramped from the cold and stillness. The rope on her wrist had stopped burning. For the first time since she'd accepted the burden, it was quiet. Not gone, she could still feel it, a weight against her skin, but silent as if even the earth was uncertain what came next. She began to walk. Not north toward the Cave of Echoes, not south toward new chains to break, but east, following nothing except the need to move. She walked for 2 days without stopping, without eating, barely seeing the landscape around her. Her mind was full of faces, the people she'd freed, the people she'd failed to protect, the ones who died because she'd made them targets. On the 3rd day, she came to a river, not the Tennessee, but a smaller waterway, maybe 50 feet across, running fast with snowmelt. She stood on the bank and looked at her reflection in the water. What she saw frightened her. The woman in the reflection looked like Hannah, same height, same features, but there was something wrong with the eyes. They were cold, empty, like windows into a room where nothing lived anymore. This was what Moses had warned her about. This was what happened to weapons when they were used too long. They stopped being anything else. "You thinking about walking in?" Hannah spun around. A woman stood 20 feet behind her, middle-aged, black, wearing a man's coat too large for her frame and carrying a walking stick. She had the look of someone who'd traveled far, the kind of worn-down exhaustion that comes from months on the road. "I'm not going to hurt you," the woman said, raising her hands. "I know who you are. Everyone between here and Memphis knows who you are. Hannah the Breaker, the woman who can't be killed, the one freeing slaves faster than new ones are born." She paused. "I need to talk to you. My name is Ruth. I don't want to talk. I know. But I walked 80 miles to find you, and I'm not leaving until you hear me out. So you can throw me in that river if you want, but I'll just climb out and keep talking, so you might as well listen." Despite everything, Hannah felt a flicker of something like amusement. Ruth reminded her of the older women at Red Hollow, the ones who'd raised their children and buried their husbands and survived everything the world threw at them through sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. "Say what you came to say." Ruth approached carefully, leaning on her walking stick. Up close, Hannah could see scars on her face, old ones, long-healed, the kind left by a whip or a fist. "I came from the Cave of Echoes. Moses sent me. He said you needed to hear something, and it had to come from someone who'd lived it, not from an old man in a cave. What do I need to hear? That you're going about this wrong. That freeing people one plantation at a time, one coffle at a time, is noble and brave and completely pointless. You're treating the symptoms, not the disease. You're breaking chains, while the foundries keep making more." "I know that," Hannah said, her voice harsh. "You think I don't know that? I can't change the law, I can't change the economy, I can't change white people's minds. All I can do is break what's in front of me." "But you can do more. That's what I came to tell you. You think you're alone, but you're not. There are others. Not like you, no one else has your power, but people who want the same thing. People who've been organizing, planning, building networks. The Underground Railroad, yes, but more than that. Armed resistance, plots to burn plantations, plans to help enslaved people fight back, not just run away. Rebellions get crushed. Always have. Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, they tried, and all they did was get hundreds of innocent people killed in retaliation. Because they didn't have you. Because they were men with normal strength facing overwhelming force. But you're not normal, Hannah. You're something new. And if you stopped operating alone, if you joined with others, if you became part of something bigger than just breaking chains. Ruth's eyes were bright with possibility. You could start something that wouldn't be crushed. Something that would spread like fire. Hannah shook her head. I'm not a leader. I don't inspire people. I just scare them. Good. Fear is useful. The masters fear you already, and that fear is spreading. Plantation owners are losing sleep, hiring more guards, questioning whether their property is really secure. You've made them uncertain, and uncertainty is the first crack in any system. But to turn that crack into a collapse, you need more than just fear. You need organization. You need allies. You need a plan that goes beyond tonight's raid. Moses sent you to recruit me. Moses sent me to save you. He's watched hundreds of people pass through the cave of echoes over the years, and he knows what happens to the ones who carry too much alone. They break, Hannah. Not their bodies, those sometimes stay strong, but their spirits, their humanity. They turn into exactly what their enemies say they are. Monsters, savages, things to be put down rather than people to be respected. He doesn't want that for you. Hannah looked back at the river, at her reflection. Monster. Maybe that's what she'd already become. Maybe it was too late for anything else. There's a meeting, Ruth continued. 3 weeks from now, in a safe house in Cincinnati. Black ministers, white abolitionists, formerly enslaved people who've organized their communities, even a few white Southerners who've turned against slavery. They're calling it the Council of Free Soil. They're planning to coordinate their efforts, share intelligence, create a real network of resistance instead of just isolated acts of defiance. They want you there. Why? Because you're a symbol. Because your name means something. Because if Hannah the Breaker says we can fight back and win, people will believe it. And belief is the first step to action. I killed 147 people, Hannah said quietly. Last week. People I was trying to save. The militia fired into the crowd, and I couldn't stop them all. So tell me, Ruth, what kind of symbol am I? What am I supposed to inspire? Ruth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. You're supposed to inspire people to understand that freedom has a price, that the fight won't be clean or easy or without cost, that some of us will die in the process of liberation, but that's better than all of us dying slowly in chains. You made a mistake last week. You tried to protect too many people at once, and the enemy exploited that. So learn from it. Change tactics. Stop trying to be everywhere. Start building something that can survive without you. And if I refuse? If I keep doing what I'm doing? Then you'll die. Maybe not physically, maybe you really are unkillable, but you'll die inside, and that's worse. You'll become a ghost that walks in daylight, a weapon that keeps swinging long after the war is over. Is that what you want? Hannah didn't answer because she didn't know. The rope on her wrist remained silent. The earth offered no guidance. For the first time since the night at Red Hollow, she was being asked to make a choice that wasn't about breaking chains. A choice about who she wanted to be when the breaking was done. 3 weeks, Ruth said. Cincinnati. The safe house is on 4th Street, above a cooper's shop. Moses will give you detailed directions if you come back to the cave. Think about it, Hannah, please. Not for me, not for Moses, but for yourself. You deserve to be more than a weapon. You deserve to be human again. Ruth turned and walked away, her walking stick tapping against the frozen ground. Hannah watched her go, then turned back to the river. The water flowed on, indifferent and eternal, carrying everything downstream, silt and leaves and blood and memory. Hannah closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself to the place where the earth's power lived. What should I do? She whispered. Tell me what you want. For a long time there was no answer. Then, faint as a distant heartbeat, she felt it. Not a command, not a direction, but a suggestion. The earth was not demanding she continue breaking chains. It was offering her a choice. The power was hers to use as she saw fit. The burden would remain. She would always feel the chains until they were all broken, but how she bore that burden was up to her. She opened her eyes. The reflection in the water looked different now. Or maybe she was just seeing it differently. Still dangerous, still frightening, but with a spark of something else, something that might, with effort, become human again. Hannah turned away from the river and headed back toward the Cave of Echoes. She arrived 2 days later, just after dawn. Moses was waiting for her, as if he'd known she would come. He didn't ask questions, didn't push. He simply handed her a cup of hot tea, real tea, somehow obtained despite the scarcity, and sat down beside her. "Ruth found you," he said. "She did. And I'm thinking about it. The meeting, Cincinnati, all of it." Hannah sipped the tea, felt the warmth spread through her chest. "But I need to understand something first. If I join this council, if I become part of something organized, what happens to the people who need me right now? The ones at plantations I haven't reached yet? Do they just wait while I sit in meetings and debate strategy? No, they wait while you train others to do what you do. Not with your power, no one else has that, but with your knowledge. You've raided dozens of plantations. You know which tactics work, which fail. You know how to move through hostile territory, how to organize freed people for travel, how to identify which overseers will fight and which will run. That knowledge is valuable. Share it, and you multiply yourself. I'm not a teacher. You don't have to be. Just tell people what you know. They'll learn, or they won't. But at least give them the chance." Moses set down his own cup. "Hannah, you're the first of your kind, but you don't have to be the last. Not in power, that's unique to you, but in courage, in determination, in refusal to accept bondage. Teach people to be their own breakers, and you'll create something that lasts beyond your life." Hannah thought about Samuel, the boy at Red Hollow who'd looked at her with such hope. She'd promised herself she would go back for him, for all of them still trapped on that plantation. But she hadn't. The rope had pulled her elsewhere, always elsewhere, and Red Hollow remained untouched, except for the memory of one night's violence. "I want to go back to Red Hollow first," she said, "before Cincinnati, before any of this. I started there, and I need to finish what I started. The people who remain there, they need to know I didn't forget them." Moses nodded slowly. "A Red Hollow is dangerous. Master Cornelius has turned it into a fortress. Every able-bodied white man within 10 miles has been hired as a guard. They're using the place as bait, hoping you'll come back so they can finally kill you. Let them try. Hannah, I'm going. I need to. Not because the rope tells me to. It doesn't. Not anymore. I need to because it's unfinished business, and I can't move forward until I've dealt with the past." She looked at Moses, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Determination mixed with clarity, purpose mixed with humanity. "After Red Hollow, I'll go to Cincinnati. I'll join your council. I'll try to be more than a weapon. But first, I need to go home." Moses smiled. It was a sad smile, because he knew what going back meant. Red Hollow would be the test, not of her power, which was beyond question, but of her judgment, her restraint, her ability to be strategic rather than just destructive. If she passed that test, she might have a future beyond breaking. If she failed, "When will you leave?" "Tonight. I'll travel fast, be there in 3 days, do what needs to be done, then head north to Ohio." Hannah stood up, her full height making Moses crane his neck to look at her. "If I don't make it, if they somehow find a way to stop me, tell Ruth and the council that I tried, that I wanted to be part of something bigger, that I died trying to be human again. You'll make it. You're Hannah the Breaker. You don't die." "Everyone dies, Moses. I'm just harder to kill than most." She left the cave that night, heading south toward Tennessee, toward Red Hollow Plantation, toward the place where her story had begun in blood and breaking. The rope on her wrist remained silent, but her heart beat strong and steady, and for the first time in months she felt something like hope. Behind her, in the Cave of Echoes, Moses gathered the people who lived there and told them to prepare. War was coming. Not the scattered raids and isolated rescues they'd grown used to, but something larger, more organized, more dangerous. Hannah the Breaker was going to try to be something more than a weapon, and if she succeeded, everything would change. If she failed, at least they would fail trying. In the darkness far to the south, Master Cornelius Hargrave stood on the porch of his rebuilt plantation house and looked out over the cotton fields. Summer was coming, the plants already knee-high, promising a good harvest if he could just maintain control until fall. He'd heard the rumors. Hannah the Breaker was moving again, freeing people across 3 states, unstoppable and inevitable as weather. He'd increased his guards, armed them with the best weapons money could buy, trained them specifically to deal with someone of her abilities, but in his heart he knew the truth. Hannah would come back. She'd started here, and she would finish here. It was only a matter of time. He just hoped his defenses would be enough. They wouldn't be. Hannah reached the boundary of Red Hollow Plantation 3 days later, just before midnight. The summer heat had broken with evening rain, and the air smelled of wet earth and honeysuckle. She stood at the edge of the forest, looking down at the plantation spread across the valley below. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. The big house had been rebuilt, newer, larger, with guard towers at each corner and torches burning through the night. The slave quarters were no longer wooden cabins, but stone structures, harder to burn, harder to escape from. Armed men patrolled in pairs, rifles ready, eyes scanning the darkness. Master Cornelius had turned Red Hollow into a prison designed to hold his property and kill anyone who tried to free them. Hannah counted 30 guards visible from her position, and she knew there would be more inside the buildings, more waiting in reserve. This wasn't a plantation anymore. It was a fortress, a statement, a challenge. She accepted the challenge, but this time she wouldn't charge in alone. Ruth's words echoed in her mind. Stop trying to be everywhere. Start building something that can survive without you. Hannah had spent the 3-day journey thinking about what that meant, and she'd formed a plan. Not just breaking chains, anyone could do that, but breaking the system so thoroughly that Red Hollow could never recover. She moved through the forest, circling the plantation, studying the defenses. The guards changed shifts at midnight. The dogs were kennelled near the tobacco barn. The main gate was chained and locked from the inside, but there were 3 other entry points, 2 small gates for field access, and a drainage culvert that ran under the southern wall. Hannah waited until 1 in the morning, when the new shift had settled into their posts and fatigue was just beginning to set in. Then she moved. She didn't go for the big house, didn't try to kill the guards or make noise. Instead, she went to the slave quarters, the stone buildings that were supposed to keep her people imprisoned. She moved silently, despite her size, placing each foot carefully, her breathing controlled. The first building had 12 people inside, men, women and children all sleeping fitfully on the stone floor. Hannah tested the door, locked from the outside with an iron bolt. She grabbed the bolt and slowly, carefully, bent it upward until it came free. The metal groaned softly but didn't break. She opened the door. Inside, everyone woke immediately. They saw her silhouette in the doorway, 7 feet tall, impossibly broad, and for a moment, no one moved. Then a voice whispered, "Hannah?" It was Samuel. He was 16 now, taller than he'd been, but still thin, still fragile-looking. His eyes were the same, too large, too knowing. He stood up slowly, shaking, and Hannah felt something in her chest loosen. She'd come back. She'd kept the promise she'd made to herself, if not to Jacob. "Everyone who wants to leave, follow me," she whispered. "Stay quiet, stay close. If shooting starts, run for the forest. Don't look back." One by one they filed out. Samuel stayed near her, his presence a reminder of why she'd started this. She moved to the next building, then the next, freeing people with surgical precision, always listening for the guards, always ready to fight if necessary, but hoping she wouldn't have to. By 2 in the morning, she'd emptied 5 buildings. 83 people stood in the shadows near the southern wall, waiting for her signal. Most were terrified. Some were excited. A few looked at her with something like worship, and that made her uncomfortable. "Listen carefully," she told them, her voice low but carrying to everyone. "We're not all leaving together. Too many people moving at once will get us caught. You're going to split into groups of 10. Each group will leave through that culvert." She pointed to the drainage opening. 10 minutes apart. Once you're in the forest, head north. Follow the creek until it meets the river, then follow the river until you reach the Cave of Echoes. Tell Moses that Hannah sent you. Tell him I'm finishing what I started here. You're not coming with us." Samuel's voice was small, frightened. "Not yet. I have work to finish, but I'll come. I promise." Samuel nodded, but Hannah could see he didn't entirely believe her. She'd made promises before and broken them, but this time would be different. This time, she would make sure. The first group of 10 disappeared through the culvert. Hannah waited, counting seconds in her head. At 9 minutes, the second group went, then the third. By the time the 8th group was preparing to leave, dawn was beginning to grey the eastern sky, and she knew they were running out of time. That's when a guard spotted them. He was young, maybe 19, doing his rounds near the southern wall. He saw the crowd of people waiting by the culvert and froze for half a second, his mind trying to process what couldn't be possible. Then he raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wild, burying itself in the stone wall, but the sound shattered the night, and suddenly guards were running from all directions, torches blazing, weapons ready. "Go! All of you, go now!" Hannah roared. The remaining people scrambled through the culvert, desperate, panicking. Some fell, were helped up, kept moving. Others froze in terror. Hannah placed herself between the fleeing people and the approaching guards. She spread her arms wide, making herself as large a target as possible, drawing their fire. Rifles cracked, bullets struck her chest, her arms, her legs, and bounced off, leaving her untouched. The guards stopped, their faces going white. They'd heard the stories, but seeing it was different. Seeing a 7-foot woman stand calmly while bullets ricocheted off her skin was different. Some dropped their weapons and ran. Others stood frozen. Master Cornelius appeared on the porch of the big house, his face purple with rage. "Shoot her! Keep shooting! She can't be immortal! Nothing's immortal!" More guards appeared, firing from different angles. 20 rifles, 30, all aimed at Hannah. The sound was deafening, the air thick with gun smoke. But Hannah didn't fall. She didn't even stagger. She simply stood there, waiting for the last of her people to escape through the culvert. When the last person disappeared into the darkness, Hannah moved. She charged the nearest group of guards, 6 men clustered near the tobacco barn. They tried to reload, but she was too fast. She grabbed the first man by his coat and threw him into the others, sending them sprawling like bowling pins. One tried to stab her with a bayonet. She broke the weapon in half and backhanded him across the barn wall. She moved through Red Hollow like a hurricane, not killing. She'd promised herself she would minimize death tonight, but incapacitating. Men flew through the air, crashed into walls, fell unconscious to the ground. Weapons shattered, guard towers toppled. The fortress that Master Cornelius had built crumbled under her assault. But there were too many of them. For every one she took down, 2 more appeared, and they were learning, adapting their tactics. Instead of shooting at her, they began targeting the stone buildings where people still hid, where not everyone had escaped. "Burn them out!" Master Cornelius screamed from his porch. "Burn the quarters! She cares about them! Use that against her!" Guards with torches ran toward the remaining slave quarters. Hannah tried to stop them, but she was on the wrong side of the compound. She ran, her long legs eating up distance, but she wasn't fast enough. The first torch landed on a thatched roof that hadn't been replaced with stone. The roof caught instantly, dry thatch going up like paper. Inside, people screamed. Hannah reached the building, tore the door off its hinges and began pulling people out. Children first, then women, then men. Smoke filled the air, thick and black. Flames roared. A guard appeared behind her with an axe, swung it at her back. The blade hit her shoulder blades and shattered, metal fragments flying. Hannah spun, grabbed the man by his throat, and for a moment, just one brief moment, she wanted to kill him, wanted to squeeze until his neck broke, until he paid for every person who'd ever suffered on this cursed ground. But she didn't. She threw him aside, alive, and returned to pulling people from the burning building, because that's what separated her from them. That's what made her human instead of a monster. She saved them all. Every person in the burning building, 18 total. They stumbled out into the yard, coughing, crying, alive, and Hannah stood between them and the guards, her body shielding them, waiting for what came next. Master Cornelius descended from his porch, a pistol in his hand. He walked slowly across the yard, his face calm now, almost serene. He'd lost. He knew he'd lost. His plantation was in chaos, his guards scattered or unconscious, his property either escaped or huddled behind a woman he couldn't kill. But he would have one final act of defiance. "You took my son," he said, his voice steady. "You took my property, you took my reputation, you took everything I built, so I'm going to take something from you." He raised the pistol and fired. Not at Hannah, but at the people behind her. At Samuel specifically, the boy who'd first caught Hannah's protection, the boy whose suffering had started this entire chain of events. Hannah moved, faster than she'd ever moved before, faster than physics should have allowed. She stepped in front of Samuel, her body blocking the path of the bullet. It struck her chest and fell harmlessly to the ground. But Master Cornelius kept firing, 6 shots, each aimed at someone different. Hannah couldn't block them all. Couldn't be in 6 places at once. She threw herself sideways, knocked 3 people to the ground, used her body to shield them. But the other 3 bullets found targets. A woman named Grace, who'd sung hymns in the quarters at night, fell with a hole in her chest. An old man named Thomas, who taught Hannah her numbers when she was a child, stumbled and went down. And a young girl, maybe 8 years old, Hannah didn't even know her name, crumpled without a sound. Hannah felt each death like a physical blow. The rope on her wrist, silent for days, suddenly burned like fire, screaming in rage at the injustice. The earth beneath her feet trembled. The air grew heavy, charged, as if a storm was gathering out of nothing. Master Cornelius stood with his empty pistol, smiling. "Now you know. Now you understand. You can't save them, Hannah. You can only watch them die. That's what you are. Not a savior, just a witness to the inevitable." Hannah looked at him, and something in her eyes made his smile falter. She took 1 step forward. The ground cracked beneath her foot. She took another step, and the crack widened, spreading across the yard like lightning frozen in stone. "You're wrong," she said, her voice resonant with something beyond human anger. "I'm not a witness, I'm a reckoning." She moved faster than Master Cornelius could track. One moment she was 10 feet away. The next, her hand was around his throat, lifting him off the ground. His pistol clattered to the earth. His feet kicked uselessly. "This is mercy," Hannah said quietly, so only he could hear. "I could keep you alive and conscious while I tore you apart piece by piece, could make you suffer for decades of suffering, but I won't because that would make me like you, so I'm giving you what you never gave anyone else, a quick death." She squeezed. His neck broke with a sound like a dry branch snapping. She dropped the body and turned away. The remaining guards were running now, abandoning their posts, fleeing into the forest. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The burning building had collapsed into coals. The people Hannah had freed stood in the yard, some crying, some praying, all watching her with expressions of awe and terror. Hannah knelt beside the 3 bodies, Grace, Thomas, and the little girl. She closed their eyes gently, whispered prayers she barely remembered from childhood, and felt something inside her break and reform, like a bone that was healing wrong, but healing nonetheless. "We bury them here," she said to the survivors. "We mark their graves, and we burn this place to the ground so completely that nothing grows here for 100 years. This land needs to forget, needs to start over. Uvai, they buried the dead in the cotton field, under the place where the plants had grown tallest. Hannah dug the graves herself, her hands moving tons of earth, creating resting places deep enough that no plough would ever disturb them. Samuel carved wooden markers, while others said prayers and sang hymns. Then, as the sun climbed higher, Hannah walked through Red Hollow Plantation and set fire to everything that would burn. The big house went first, flames consuming the place where Thomas Hargrave had died, where she'd first broken her silence. The barns followed, then the gin house, then the offices where Master Cornelius had kept his ledgers of human property. By noon, Red Hollow was an inferno. By evening, it was ash. Hannah stood at the edge of the forest, watching the last walls collapse, and felt the rope on her wrist finally grow quiet. Not gone, but satisfied, one debt paid. One beginning ended, so a new beginning could start. Samuel appeared beside her, a small bundle of possessions in his arms. What happens now? Now we go north, to Ohio, to a place called Cincinnati, where people are planning something bigger than raids and rescues. Where maybe, if we're lucky, we can build something that lasts longer than one woman's strength. And after that? Hannah looked down at him, and for the first time in months, smiled. After that, I don't know. I've never had an after that before, but I'm ready to find out. They walked into the forest, followed by the 83 people Hannah had freed, and the dozens more who'd escaped before the final battle. Behind them, Red Hollow burned until nothing remained but memories and ash, and 3 graves in a field that would never grow cotton again. The journey to Cincinnati took 10 days. They moved in groups, using all the tactics Hannah had learned, all the routes Moses had taught her. They lost no one. Every person who'd left Red Hollow arrived at the safe house on 4th Street, above the cooper's shop, alive and free. The Council of Free Soil met in a large room that smelled of wood shavings and candle wax. There were 30 people present, black and white, formerly enslaved and never enslaved, ministers and merchants and a few white Southerners who'd turned against the system that had enriched them. They looked at Hannah with varying expressions: hope, fear, calculation, awe. Ruth was there, smiling. Moses had traveled up from Kentucky, looking proud. And at the head of the table sat a man Hannah didn't recognize, middle-aged, black, with intelligent eyes and hands scarred from some kind of skilled labor. "I'm Frederick," he said simply. "Frederick Douglass, and I've been waiting to meet Hannah the Breaker for a long time." Hannah sat down in a chair, reinforced to hold her weight. Samuel stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. The rope on her wrist was warm but not burning, present, patient, waiting to see what she would choose. "I'm listening," Hannah said. Frederick Douglass smiled. "Then let's begin. We have a lot of work to do." Outside, the summer evening was clear and warm. In Tennessee, the ruins of Red Hollow Plantation cooled under the stars, the ash settling, the earth beginning the slow process of forgetting and healing. In a cave beneath the hills, the pool of water glowed faintly. The skeletons leaned forward in approval, and the woman on the shore, the guardian, felt something shift in the spirit world. The weapon had become a woman again. The breaking had transformed into building, and the reckoning, which had begun in blood and violence and grief, was finally becoming something else, something like hope, something like a future. Hannah the Breaker sat in a room full of revolutionaries and listened to plans for a war that would last 4 years and end slavery forever in America. She didn't know that yet. Didn't know she would live to see that ending, would stand on a battlefield in Virginia in 1865 and watch the last Confederate army surrender, would be there when President Lincoln signed the papers that made her people legally human. All she knew in that moment was that she was tired and hopeful, and for the first time since Red Hollow, at peace. The earth beneath her feet hummed with satisfaction. The work was not done, would never be done as long as chains existed anywhere in the world. But it was begun. It was real. It was enough. Hannah the Breaker closed her eyes, felt Samuel's hand on her shoulder, and allowed herself to rest. The story of the 7-foot-tall woman who'd killed 5 men with her bare hands and freed thousands more became legend. Some of it was true, some of it was exaggerated, all of it was remembered. They buried her name in official records, tried to erase her from history, but the earth remembered. And in western Tennessee, on nights when the storms roll in without thunder, farmers sometimes hear heavy footsteps in the dirt and know that Hannah still walks, still watches, still waits for the day when all chains are finally dust. Her story ended in 1869, when she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 47. Impossibly young for the life she'd lived, impossibly old for someone who'd suffered as she had. Samuel was with her at the end, grown into a man, a teacher, a father. "Did I do enough?" she asked him in those final moments. He held her enormous hand in his and smiled through his tears. "You did more than enough. You broke the world so we could remake it. You showed us that change was possible, that the impossible was just hard, not impossible. You gave us hope when hope was dead. Yes, Hannah, you did enough." She smiled then, and the rope on her wrist, which had never left, which she'd carried for 23 years, finally dissolved, its purpose complete. The earth released her from its service. The burden lifted. Hannah the Breaker closed her eyes and slept. They buried her in an unmarked grave to protect it from those who would defile it. But the earth knows where she lies, and sometimes, in the deep places where stone remembers and water whispers secrets, you can still feel her presence. Waiting, watching, ready to rise again if the chains return, because some stories don't end. They just wait for the next chapter.